This question has been 17 years in the making.
Wow.
Because 17 years ago, you announced in one of your classes that you were working on a novel. So congratulations on finishing it. I see the things on anything else when I know it touches on a lot of
Yeah.
themes that you spoke about today. I've seen a little blurb that you've written about the book. So any little morsel you could give us right now? Just
You might not like it because it's big and sprawling and messy. It's an angel's eye view of the connection between Jesus Christ, dead Vikings, Mohammed, fat Jewish mother substitutes, the rights of the handicapped, post-abortion trauma, 2.5 popes in 1 year, Russian prophets, the crisis in Catholic schools, post-abortion trauma, suicide, and the end of the world, among other things. It's called An Ocean Full of Angels. And actually, I got the inspiration for it in 1978, sitting in right field at Fenway Park, when the greatest game in the history of baseball was lost by the Red Sox because an angel put the baseball in Lou Pinella's glove twice. I talked to him afterwards because his daughter and mine were roommates, and that's what he told me. He said, I had no idea where the ball was. Those were the 2 runs that would have won the game. So I started thinking, what's that angel supposed to be doing instead of fooling around in right field in Fenway Park? He's supposed to be saving Western civilization somehow, and from that came the whole rest of the stuff.
I would just say, because I know you're a big Red Sox fan, and my Yankees t-shirt.
This will prove that all Christians obey or try to obey Christ's law of charity. I will speak to you as if you were a normal, sane human being. Yeah.
Would you comment on Augustine? One of the most awesome things learned by some people is our hearts are never at rest until they rest in thee. And the other one is believe to understand, or try to understand. Did he have an awesome change of heart, and how did he come to those?
Read the Confessions. No Christian should be allowed to die without having read the Confessions. It's a masterpiece. It's inexhaustible. It's beautiful. Yeah.
You mentioned before about how we're riddled with diversions and there's so much noise constantly. Could you talk about that a little bit more?
I could, but I won't because there's not that much time. But Pascal talks about it in the Pensées. Read him. I wrote a book about it called Christianity for Modern Pagans. Pascal's Pensées explained. Pascal, I think, is the most effective Christian apologist to modern students, because he exposes this diversion and indifference that permeates our lives.
I was going to ask what your opinion was on Pascal's wager.
Pascal's wager is a good argument for skeptics. It's not a good argument for believers, because believers don't need it. It's a very crass argument. It's basically an eternal fire insurance policy. You don't know whether God exists or not. You can't lose anything if you bet on him, but you can lose eternity if you bet against him. So it's a really stupid bet to bet against him. Now, that's not a very high and holy motive. It's kind of selfish and crass, but it should at least strike a little bit of fear into the heart of a pragmatic atheist. And it might be a beginning, which can lead on to higher things. There's more to it than that. It's much profounder than that. So I think it's a very clever argument to a skeptic or a non-believer. But I don't think it's a good argument for a believer who has more honest and serious reasons for believing.
When does the human will become operative? Is it at the age of reason or at conception?
Yeah. Will, as distinct from animal desire, is coextensive with reason. Will makes a free choice when reason illuminates it. And nobody knows at exactly the moment that you make your first genuinely free choice. It's almost certainly sometime after the age of 2, and almost certainly sometime before the age of 7. But where in there, nobody knows. Maybe that's similar to when did the first human being evolve? Was Neanderthal man human? Was Pithecanthropus erectus human? Was it 100,000 years ago? Was it 50,000 years ago? We don't know. We see water, and then we see steam, and we don't see the exact moment at which water becomes steam. There's a radical difference, but we don't see it. Got time for one more question because we have to get out at 6:30. Yes?
So, one of your arguments, I think you referenced to Aunt Martha or Linda or whatever, was that she was a good person and you would look at her and you would see that she's a good person, and because you see good traits in her, these good traits must have a sort of an absolute end, and that would be God. Could one argument against that be someone would see Aunt Linda and see she has these good traits and recognize either, maybe have decided consciously or even unconsciously that if everyone had followed these traits that Aunt Linda shows, then that would be the best possible society, and we're very happy because of all the good things that she does. But it becomes effectively an absolute because not everyone lives like that. In fact, no one lives like that because we're all flawed. But if everyone lived like that, this would sort of be that absolute ideal, and that's what she points to rather than God.
Well, if it's only an absolute ideal and not God, then it's not real until somebody attains it. It's just a blueprint, it's not a building. And if it's God but not the absolute ideal, if God's not perfect, if God's just a mind but out of will, or intelligence without love, or if he's got a dark side, then you got to criticize him by that higher ideal, and then God's not the highest being. Then God's bad or weak or stupid. So the ideal and the real God have to coincide. So when you're in touch with a concept of God that's defective, and you judge it as defective, then the ideal that you're using as your standard for judgment, that's more God than the God that you're judging. There's an argument like that in one of Plato's dialogues, the Euthyphro. Socrates asks a young man who claims to be an expert on holiness. He's very arrogant. He says, is a thing holy simply because the gods will it, or do the gods will it because it's holy? And Euthyphro says, oh, it's holy only because the gods will it. Oh, well then if the gods willed evil things, they'd suddenly become good? Yeah. Oh, so you really don't worship the gods because they're good, but just because they have power. Well, that's not me. I worship them because they're good. And I think the good goes all the way up. So when you have that absolute conscience and that absolute ideal, you have an insight into the mind of God and the will of God. It's not a perfect insight, but what you are touching there is not just a human-generated ideal that's imperfect. That's quite amazing when you come to think of it. We, imperfect creatures, are somehow deep down aware of the absolute perfect standard. How could that be if that's not God speaking in our conscience?
God is eternal, but the time here is not, unfortunately. Certainly, thank you very much, Dr. Kreeft, for being with us today.